Welcome to the Voice of Islam. The Voice of Islam is a weekly radio program organized by the Islamic Council of Jamaica, the umbrella organization for the Muslim community in Jamaica, to propagate the message of Islam, dispel the common misconceptions about Islam, and facilitate a medium to provide Islamic perspective on topical issues and alternative solutions. You may contact the Islamic Council of Jamaica at 648-9545. That's 648-9545. You are listening to the Voice of Islam. Before we begin, let's take a few minutes to listen to the recitation of verses selected from the final revelation to mankind, Al-Quran.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. واذكر في الكتاب مريم إذ انتبذت من أهلها مكانا شرقيا فاتخذت من دونهم حجابا فأرسلنا إليها روحنا فتمثل لها بشرا سويا قالت إني أعوذ بالرحمن منك إن كنت تقيا قال إنما أنا رسول ربك لأهب لك غلاما زكيا. And mention, O Muhammad, in the book the story of Mary when she withdrew from her family to a place towards the east. And she took in seclusion from them a screen. Then we sent to her our angel, and he represented himself to her as a well-proportioned man. She said, Indeed, I seek protection in the most merciful from you, so leave me if you should be fearing of Allah. He said, I am only the messenger of your Lord to give you news of a pure boy. She said, How can I have a boy while no one has touched me and I have not been unchaste? He said, Thus it will be. Your Lord says, It is easy for me, and we will make him a sign to the people and a mercy from us, and it is a matter already decreed. So she conceived him, and she withdrew with him to a remote place.
You are listening to the Voice of Islam.
Assalamu alaikum. Peace be unto all, and welcome back, dear listening audience. Now we're in the phase of chattel slavery with regards to our presentation of Muslims within Jamaica and the Americas. Now, there was a significant amount of Muslims in Haiti as well. Let us look at Imam Makandal, who was a Mandingo chief and imam and learned scholar of Islam. And his students and his students were people who resisted the French in Haiti, which eventually led to a revolution in 1804, the first of its kind in the Western Hemisphere. And the leaders of that revolution, of course, were Toussaint Louverture and Jacques Dessalines. But the core group that resisted for years before Toussaint Louverture's rise to prominence were people who had come from Western Africa and who were from the Mandingo tribe. And if you are not only honest but brutally honest with self, me included, I've never met a Mandingo in all of my travels and all of my readings who was not a Muslim. There may be some, but the number is probably negligible. Let us also reflect on the Religious Heart Talk viewing airing in 2012. Dr. Sultana Afroz, who worked as a professor of history and who, alhamdulillah, received a PhD in American history from the University of Kansas, worked at the University of the West Indies from 1986 to 2012. She was on the Religious Heart Talk program of Mr. Ian Boyne, the renowned journalist and man of astute journalistic reputation, and she mentioned that Sam Sharp was a Muslim. Now, we Muslims, we're not going to say no, and we're not going to say yes for the sake of wisdom, but let us look at that period very carefully. On the 28th of December 1831, a very serious insurrection took place because people were very tired of being bullied. They were tired of being used. They were tired of making the colonial powers there and then very rich billionaires. So a revolt began, which led, of course, to Sam Sharp and Mr. Duane being hung in May of 1832. During this time, there was a man called George Wilson Bridges. I repeat, George Wilson Bridges. And George Wilson Bridges was sent as a rector of the Anglican Church of England, the Church of England, to Jamaica. And he was also stationed in Bahamas at one stage. And he would oftentimes express that the enslaved Africans there in Jamaica, were not conforming to Christian principles. So he had churches, 17 churches, in some accounts 18, between Hanover, St. James, and Westmoreland, burned to the ground. He did that because they were not conforming. And in his own writings, in his memoirs, he said, these Africans are not conforming, and they will not cease in the practice of the ritual of the fasting in the month of Ramadan. Now, dear listeners, what people on the earth fasts during the month of Ramadan? The month of Ramadan is the 9th month of the lunar calendar. The 9th month of the lunar calendar. And during that month, Muslims are commanded to fast so that they may attain the consciousness of God, righteousness and piety and sobriety in their lives and those around them, wherein they leave off food, drink, and between spouses, conjugal activities during the daylight hours. Only Muslims fast in a month known as Ramadan of the lunar calendar. So Bridges is showing us that there was a considerable amount of Muslims in Jamaica during the time of the rebellion of Daddy Sam Sharp. Also, it should be noted that in 2008, I personally, with a few of my cousins, visited the museum in Nassau in the Bahamas on Mackey Street. I repeat, on Mackey Street. Maybe it was number 10, I'm not sure, but it was on Mackey Street. I went to the first floor, I went to the second floor, and I asked for documents where it will show that there were Muslims living on Exuma Islands and various parts of Bahamas as late as 1802. The documents that I purchased personally has verses from the Quran written in Arabic by the enslaved Africans themselves. I repeat, Mackey Street in Nassau in the Bahamas. For those who are desperate and would like to see it, the flight is 1 hour from either Donald Sangster or Norman Manley.
You are listening to the Voice of Islam.
Also, we have to reflect on the rebellion of Taki. There are many West Africans till this day that they have the name Nuruddin, which is light of the faith, or Takideen, one who has restraint, one who has the fear of God within the faith. Takiuddin. In 1760, he led a very well-planned rebellion in the St. Mary Parish. Also, we have to look at people such as going back to the Manchester area. There was a revolt in 1816, there was one in 1831, and there was another one again in 1835. All inspired by a wathiqa. A wathiqa is a document, all written in Arabic, amongst the slaves in the various parishes in the various regions within Jamaica itself. So during the chattel slavery period, there were Muslims who resisted. This Abu Bakr Sadiq, though, he should be spoken about a little bit. He was born in 1790 in Timbuktu. Timbuktu is a city that's in current-day Mali. And he was forcibly captured and taken to Jamaica and to work as a slave. Of course, he made another sham conversion, saying that he was a Christian, but Robert Madden, of course, uncovered all of this. And there was a noting that many of the people who were enslaved Africans from West and West Central Africa were indeed still Muslims and holding to the faith that they came from West Africa with. Of course, it's an incontestable fact that there were two religious systems that were practiced throughout the history of West Africa, especially during the great empires of Ghana, Mali, and Songhai, and that was the African-centered religions and the religion of Islam. It also should be noted carefully that the people in St. Anne are now reflecting on the place known as Abuka. Abuka. Why Abuka? Many West African people who came and were then enslaved had the name Abu Bakr. The name Abu Bakr. So, place names evolve through the influence of people there or their tribes. Also, we have to acknowledge that the West African Mande way of saying Al-Imam is Al-Mami. Al-Mami is the Mandingo way to say Al-Imam, which is the leader, spiritual and social leader of a community of Muslims. And you find that there is a Mami in St. Anne, nearby the RIU Hotel. There's a Mami Bay also in south of Old Harbor. And there's also a place called Mami in Honduras, British Honduras, which is now called Belize. In the United States, I personally met a set of people who are called the Garifuna, also known as the Carib. We call them Carib Indians, but they were Carib natives who had lived off the coast of Honduras, and they were practicing Islam for a long time, to the point where the Daily Clarion, which is the newspaper of Belize, British Honduras, published in I think August of 1946 or September of 1946, made it clear that these people did not eat pork, and they were tenacious in keeping to their faith of Islam. Of course, the newspaper report regarded them as Mohammedans. But Mohammedans is a term used by non-Muslims to describe Muslims, because we follow Muhammad. But the point that they don't realize for us is that Jesus to Muslims is a prophet of Islam, because he submitted his will to the will of God. And the same for Abraham and Moses and Noah, because they submitted their wills to the will of the one God. So it would make them all prophets of Islam. The only difference, as was mentioned in another segment, is that Prophet Muhammad is the last prophet, and he did not come for only one people, but for all people until the day of judgment.
You are listening to the Voice of Islam.
For those who are interested in Pan-Africanism and African history or Black history, they should reflect on the incontestable fact that Edward Blyden, who was born on August 3rd, 1832 in the Danish Virgin Islands, which is now part of the U.S. Virgin Islands, and who died on February 7th, 1912, was a diplomat, an educator who knew the Arabic language very well, the Hebrew language very well, the Greek language very well, French language very well, Spanish very well. What I'm saying to those who are interested in Afrocentric or African history, then you've got to be like Edward Blyden to some extent. If you don't know these languages, then there should be a respect for those who do know and who have studied the sources of the people whom you say you're descended from in those languages. And Edward Blyden himself wrote a book called Islam, Christianity, and the Negro Race. And he was an unbending advocate, saying that Islam was the best system of life for the African people and those in the diaspora. And he was also a part of the American Colonization Society, which was a group based in New York. And of course, John Russwurm Brown from Jamaica, who came to New York, who was a part of that. And many of those who were in the Marcus Garvey movement, by the way, was a part of that. Or who knew of that. Those individuals advocated primary source information. So when you go to Edward Blyden, who's known as the father of Pan-Africanism, and even Dr. Umar Johnson acknowledged that a person like himself was just awesome. And also, we should recognize as well, within this context, that there is a man called Duse Muhammad Ali. His name is Duse Muhammad Ali. He was the one who formulated the impressive standard and had a very significant influence as a psychological counselor and teacher of Marcus Garvey. Now, the proof of Duse Muhammad Ali's effect on Marcus Garvey comes from his wife, the mother of Dr. Marcus Garvey Jr., born in 1930, the mother of Dr. Julius Garvey, the cardiologist in New York. She said, Duse Muhammad was the one who had brought forward the slogan, Africa for the Africans. Africa for the Africans. He's also the one who influenced Marcus Garvey with the slogan, or with the term, one God, one aim, one destiny. So Liberty Hall downtown, one God, one aim, one destiny, came from a Muslim who was of Sudanese and Egyptian extract living in England, who Marcus Garvey met and taught him these things, because he was not being so Afrocentric, so to speak, but he was trying to advocate justice, because there was a lot of pressure from the colonial forces at the time and the downright oppression. So Amy Jakes Garvey, who died in 1975, the mother of Marcus Garvey's two children, said Duse Muhammad brought forward the slogan, Africa for the Africans. And it appears that Garvey had learned much from Duse Muhammad, but had decided to strike out himself for leadership. Also in 1912, Garvey was in London working, growing, and seeing new dimension of the black man's struggle. His close association with Duse Muhammad Ali helped him to sharpen his ideas about African redemption. He worked for a while on the monthly newspaper called African Times and Orient Review. You guys should, really look it up. Edited by Ali himself, and an association that was a continuation of Marcus Garvey's political education. Howard University professor Dr. Ased Dibebe said it cannot be doubted that conversation with Duse Muhammad Ali helped to stir the Africanism in Marcus Garvey. And look, Marcus Garvey was what? The leader of a group called the UNIA. The UNIA, the Universal Negro Improvement Association and Africa Communities League, UNIA, ACL. He established that movement in Jamaica in 1914, then he opened a branch in New York in 1916. So he, without doubt, galvanized many people of African descent throughout the Americas to join that movement. It was a very powerful movement. But within the movement, people who are descendants of Africans now, especially those who had come from Georgia and South Carolina, and those who had been in Jamaica, such as Sister Layla, who passed in 1989, Allah yarhamah, may the one God have mercy upon her. Those people that were there in the 20s and 30s were descendants of people who had been Muslims before. So the question came up in the UNIA as to what religious direction that the UNIA would go in. What direction would the UNIA go in? And Mr. Garvey never made a concrete decision, but it is known that when they began a meeting for the Universal Negro Improvement Association, which was a powerful movement of people of the African diaspora within the Americas, this is how it read. God of all creation, or father of all creation? Allah, omnipotent supreme. Allah, omnipotent supreme. In the movement headed by Marcus Garvey. So please, for those who are really interested in primary source evidences and not emotions, go back and look at who Duse Muhammad Ali was, 1866 to 1945. Look at Martin Delaney. Look at who he was. And look at Edward Wilmot Blyden, who was multilingual. And the influence on the movements that began for freedom, justice, respect, and honor in the society.
You are listening to the Voice of Islam.
As we go further, in terms of this influence, there is a misunderstanding here as far as Arabs being involved in slavery. It is true throughout history that at times Arabs had been in slavery, Europeans had been in slavery, Africans have been in slavery, Asians have been in slavery. We will admit that Tibbo, Tibbo, Google it, read about it. Sometimes the book reading is better than the Googling, to be honest with you. Tibbo from Oman, which is on the far eastern side of the Arabian Peninsula. A dark-skinned Arab man was involved in taking people from an area which is now called Zanzibar. Now let's look carefully now. Zanzibar has remained as an island, but before 1964, Zanzibar and Tanganyika, were separate islands. Then it became Tanzania upon independence in 1964 with the leadership of Julius K. Nyerere. Zanzibar still remains an island there. And it was said in some books that there was a slave market in Zanzibar. So one historian of repute, in this case, went to Zanzibar to try to find out where was this slave market. Because there's this notion that it is Islam that promotes slavery. How could it? The evidences of Islam are against this. So anyway, what was found out as purported to be a slave market was a chambers in Zanzibar where the British stored medicine after a breakout of cholera. So when you go to the source, you see something different. And that's what I'm calling the Jamaican audience to do. Look at what is the primary source information of what I do believe. Please, it's best for you. It's intelligent. It's awe-inspiring when you know the truth. With regard to this example, though, there was some slave trading going, but at a very low volume. And when you look at the issue of the chattel slavery on the west coast of Africa, that took place primarily between the 1500s and the 1800s. Tibbo lived in the late 1800s, and he was the chief person amongst the Arabs who transported people forcibly from the east coast of Africa, primarily into places of the Indo-Pakistani subcontinent, into a place where the people are known as the Makran people at this time. But that's after chattel slavery. So us in the West, we can't complain about that. We do have to acknowledge, though, that some Africans helped to sell us. Some Arabs helped to sell us. Some Europeans helped to sell us. But it wasn't the religion or no text from the religion that helped to sell anyone. 4 months ago, I had a student from the Al-Bargash family. I met him. And I said, tell me about your family. Let's go back 200-300 years. And after listening to him, I became even more convinced that when you look at the source itself, some exaggeration has gone on, and it has influenced people to think incorrectly about first-hand and primary source material. That is not correct, and it shouldn't be. Anyway, as we go forward, we should acknowledge that there were many people of African descent on the plantations throughout the Americas. And let us look at Philip D. Curtin's work and, of course, his visit to Jamaica during the time of his work, Africa Remembered, in 1967. And he made it clear through his research at the time, using a figure of 9.5 million people coming out of West Africa, that between 1655 to 1807, that about 56.8%, approximately 57% of all the people who became enslaved Africans had come from African-dominated places. But when you look at the figure by other historians, who, whether they have 30 million or 50 million, then the percentage would naturally increase exponentially to between 70 to 77%. So I pray that this segment would have been of benefit, and that any mistakes that I've made is my own.
Thank you all for listening to The Voice of Islam, a weekly radio program organized by the Islamic Council of Jamaica to propagate the message of Islam, dispel the common misconceptions about Islam, and facilitate a medium to provide Islamic perspective on topical issues and alternative solutions. Remember, you may collect a free Quran, yes, a free Quran, by emailing us, sending a text message, or visiting any of our locations. Please send in your questions and comments to islamradiojm@gmail.com. That's islamradiojm@gmail.com, or by text message to 892-1350. That's 892-1350. You may also visit our Facebook page, facebook.com/Islamic Council of Jamaica, or find us on Instagram at ICOJ_official, or you may listen to a